We're talking about the ongoing corruption scandal and political unrest in Brazil. Joining us from Brazil is João Ferreira Jr. He is a political science professor at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. Here in Washington is the director of Brazil Works, Mark Langevin. Also joining us is Rogério Checa. He's a member of the Brazilian protest movement, and also with us in Washington is the director of the Brazil Institute, Paulo Sotero. Mark, the Congress in Brazil right now is not exactly friendly to the president. It's a very conservative Congress, and I'm wondering to what extent they will block the program that the president has. And I also want you to address this debate that we've been having about media bias and the way her own media team has been handling the press in Brazil.
Well, let's treat Congress first.
Yeah.
It's a difficult scenario for Dilma, but what makes it more difficult, something that we haven't mentioned yet, is the general Congress approval rate is even lower than the president's. And that really complicates it. It confuses some of the legislative leaders about where they want to go and so forth. And I think what we're seeing now is there's been some confrontations with the president, but now is the time to kind of get serious about, well, what needs to be passed. Of the anti-corruption measures, what needs to be passed right now? The fiscal adjustment, what really needs to be passed right now, and other decisions put off somewhat. So that's important. In terms of the whole media situation, I think that the president has not been assertive in getting out in front of this and talking directly to the Brazilians, of which they appreciate. They appreciate when the president talks directly to them. She's going to have to solve that one way or another in order to have the stature in front of Congress to help to lead Congress towards some consensus policy making with respect to the fiscal adjustment, anti-corruption measures, and some of the longer-term structural reforms to get Brazil's economy rebooted and more integrated into the global economy. What's going to have to happen, too, is everyone's going to have to recoil, sit back a bit, because a lot has been said. Certainly, the international environment right now has not been conducive to economic growth. The terms of trade that Brazil now has is quite a bit less than they've experienced in the last decade. So that's an issue. What we've also seen, I beg to disagree with Rogério, with the case of the United States compared to Southern Europe, those austerity programs that were implemented in Southern Europe have been a tremendous failure. While in the United States, we've had a consistent kind of stimulus policy framework, and it's bringing this economy back to where it is. So Brazil has to get serious in terms of the media starting to dig down and compare where Brazil really is, so that we know which measures are appropriate right now to get the economy rolling again.
Dr. Ferreira, so we heard the people of Brazil, the voters of Brazil, may be unhappy with President Dilma Rousseff, but they are even more unhappy with Congress in Brazil. So does this speak to a general disillusionment among the people of Brazil with the way the country is being governed right now across the board?
Yeah, I think we have to, I want to go back to the media problem, because Paulo just said, he's correct in saying that Dilma wasn't very effective in communicating with the people. But on the other hand, there are two factors here. The media in Brazil, people have to understand that the big media in Brazil is owned by, 5 to 7 families that have been around since the military dictatorship. And these big media groups have collaborated with the military dictatorship, and since then has showed a very conservative profile. So everything, and they have, I study that, I lead a research group that studies the media, and they have showed consistent bias against PT, the Workers' Party, social movements in general. So it's not something that is only focused on Dilma. That has been around for some time, for decades, and it's a major problem of Brazilian democracy. I call that the corruption of the public space.
Paulo?
And people talk about corruption, in the state, but on the other hand, don't take that into consideration.
Yes, I think João is correct that yes, the media is biased in a conservative way. This has not prevented, though, the Workers' Party for governing Brazil for 12 years. This has not prevented the Workers' Party for electing and re-electing presidents, governors, congressmen, etc. I think the task at hand is one where the objective is precisely to ensure that the gains Brazil made as a democracy, because it stabilized its economy and it had a president in Lula, José Inácio Lula da Silva, that found a way of spreading the wealth is to preserve that. I think Joaquim Levy has been insisting on that. The objective of this 180 turn in policy is to preserve that. It's not for the sake of the market, it's for the sake of the Brazilian people. Now, it's very difficult to do, it's very hard to do, and there is also another thing going. We are debating in Brazil, again, to cite the Minister of Finance the other day, Joaquim Levy said, it is very difficult because a state capitalism, which is a feature of Brazilian development, and democracy, or state capitalism doesn't work very well in democracy. Since we are not giving up on democracy, I think that we have to engage in this debate and reinvent state intervention in the economy in a more effective, efficient, intelligent way, because the way we have done in the recent past lead to outcomes like the one we are facing right now.
Rogério, I'm wondering if you could just address what Mark said earlier on, that the austerity measures that were implemented in Europe have not exactly been successful. We're seeing that right now. We're seeing what's happening in Greece right now, whereas here in the United States, the pro-growth policies have been very successful.
So I think the first point to make about what my colleagues were talking before is that, yes, corruption is widespread in Brazil right now. We are not criticizing corruption only at the government, at the federal government level. Corruption is widespread also in Congress, and there is huge evidence with that with the ongoing investigations on Petrolão. I just want to make clear that Movimento Vem Pra Rua is trying to fight and protest against corruption at any levels. The problem is that we totally recognize that an adjustment is necessary. What is being done, though, is that this adjustment is happening only by increasing taxes in order to cover for both corruption and the incredible size of the government. If this government doesn't bring up measures that cut their own skin at the same time as they try to get the support of the population, this is not going to fly. At the same time as they are trying to increase taxes for the people very meaningfully and increase prices that were totally held down during the last 4 years artificially, they are tripling the money that they are providing to the parties. And that is an increase of practically 550 million reais, which is about $200 million at the same time that they are trying to increase taxes. The government is not acting in a coherent way, and therefore it will be very difficult to implement measures and approve measures that are looking at only one side of the equation.
Okay, Paulo, I'll come to you in a moment. Mark, are we hearing anything about political reforms in Brazil? Things like financing for campaigns, you know, bringing in public financing for campaigns.
There's been a lot of talk, and if you remember in July of 2013, immediately after some of the mobilizations by people that were interested in actually wanting better public services at less cost, Dilma introduced a package of measures to do the political reform. Since then, there's been other alternatives floated in Congress. There doesn't seem to be any consensus on political reform, and it seems that right now the hot topics are the fiscal adjustment and the sequencing of which policies are best right now. Rogério has criticized the taxes. They're one part of it, but other people are going to feel the burden as well. Other sectors and so forth. Some of the major corporations in Brazil will now will not have access to low interest rate loans from the government development bank. So everybody's going to feel the pinch and so forth. But what's really going on now is that prioritization. I don't think we're going to get to a political reform in the next 2 years. It's possible thereafter, but the economy's got to come back, and the anti-corruption measures, there has to be some progress in Congress on those.
Paulo?
Well, I think one important difference between what happens in Southern Europe and what happens in Brazil today is that in Brazil, the plan that was announced by President Dilma Rousseff on the 1st of January, her inauguration, is adopted voluntarily by Brazil. No one is imposing those things on Brazil. There is no IMF there, and because the people in the government, in the governing coalition, as unpleasant as this thing is, they know that this is important. Actually, the irony is that if the opposition had won the election, they would be implementing the exact same plan, because there is no alternative to this. Brazil has decided in what is the path. The path is markets, obviously a well-regulated market. There is this discussion that I mentioned about the economic model. More state, less state.
Okay.
It looks like we are going to have that debate for a while.
Okay, Dr. Ferreira, we have 1 minute left. The Workers' Party in Brazil, it's dominated politics in that country for more than a decade. Is its dominance now being seriously eroded?
I think so, partially eroded, but it hasn't dominated politics. The Workers' Party also won elections in coalition with major parties like the PMDB. So, you know, it wasn't totally dominant, I think. They won elections, and that's quite different in a system like Brazil, where Congress has, you know, a major importance, and the Supreme Court too. So we have, you know, the basic institutions of a liberal democracy. So I don't think that the power of the Workers' Party was that big, that great. And, but of course, it's been a little undermined lately.